I only looked away from the park for a moment. When I glanced back, nothing seemed wrong. Swings hung still. Street lamp buzzed sickly orange. But on my windowsill lay a crushed dandelion, stem wet with dew. That's when I realized something had already been watching me from the dark. That night, laughter started at 2:47 a.m. High, looping, far too close. It wasn't from the park. It was inside the walls. By morning, the bruises appeared, crescent welts on the back of my hand, shaped exactly like small, eager fingers. And somehow, they knew my name. Welcome back to Ethereal Echoes. Settle in, get comfortable, and let the world fade away. With tonight's story, the first person to spot the hidden ghost emoji and comment with the exact timestamp it appears, their comment will be pinned. Good luck. The laughter woke me at 2:47 a.m. It sliced through the dark like the high, shivering whine of a fox cub in heat. Yet beneath it lay a looping, almost melodic persistence that felt ancient and wrong. Something that had never belonged to the natural order of night. I had been drifting in the perfect blackness, the kind that seals the inside of a coffin, heavy and velvet soft, where every pulse feels like an intrusion. Then, the sound tore the seal apart and hurtled me back into my own sweat-damped sheets, heart hammering against my ribs like a prisoner desperate to escape. For a long moment, I lay perfectly still, breathing around the sound, letting it wrap around me like a wire. It drifted from the park across the street, that small, dark green triangle where 3 faded residential roads converged. Even the windows shut tight and the fan spinning its constant white noise. I knew this was no trick of acoustics or half dream. It was real. It was intentional, woven deliberately through the mesh of my bedroom screen. The house itself was old, pre-worn bones, humming the anxious tension of every life that had passed through its walls. My sleep here had always been thin, fragile as old paper, easily torn by the slightest disturbance. I rose slowly and shuffled to the front window, peeling the curtain back with just the edge of one finger. Because somehow the laughter itself seemed to demand privacy, as if it were a private performance meant only for the eyes that dared to look. On the sidewalk, directly beneath the one lamp that still held a working bulb, 3 small shapes flickered between the shadows and sickly gold. Children, 2 boys and 1 girl, none of them older than 9. Their outlines stood too sharp against the sodium glow. Their limbs moved with a loose, spidery grace that felt unnatural for the hour. joints bending in ways that suggested they had never fully learned the strict limits of human flesh, or perhaps had been built to bend in directions the living could not. My house faces the park. That view was one of the reasons I had rented it, to watch the ordinary rhythm of runners, mothers pushing strollers, and children orbiting the promise of open grass and empty space. At night, the park officially closed, the sign clearly stating, "No loitering after 10 p.m." But in this neighborhood, rules were only whispered about in daylight and enforced with little more than a shrug. Still, children out after 2 a.m. crossed a line even my insomnia could not ignore. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass, flattening the too predominant bridge of my nose until it ached. The laughter rose again, higher this time, curling so close it seemed to vibrate inside the walls themselves. The children slowed their looping game of tag. Their movements fell suddenly into eerie sync, like dry leaves caught in the same invisible cyclone. Then, the oldest boy stopped dead in his tracks. He turned on the ball of one bare foot and looked up, past the lamp, past the stripes of dying lawn, and the thicket of private hedges, straight into my window, straight into me. He didn't squint against the light. His eyes didn't dart or adjust. They simply locked on, wide, dark, and completely voided, as if they had been patiently waiting for this exact moment when I would finally notice him. The smile that slowly opened across his face was nothing human. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't mocking. It was the quiet, knowing smile a skull might wear if it were ever granted the chance to express joy. His teeth glistened wetly in the park's sickly orange light. In that frozen instant, I understood with terrible clarity he was not, strictly speaking, a child at all. I do not frighten easily. I've worked graveyard shifts, taken late-night rides through empty streets, and answered call center phones when the worst parts of humanity crawl out after dark. But as he held my gaze without blinking, the skin at the back of my neck first prickled, then burned like frostbite spreading slowly under the skin. I began to pull the curtain closed when a sharp, hot pinch seized the back of my right hand, deep and sudden, as if an invisible set of nails had reached straight through the glass and clamped down hard on a tendon. The pain flared bright and vicious. My mouth opened in a hiss. I jerked my hand back and clamped my palm over the spot, expecting blood, expecting torn skin, or at least a splinter. There was nothing. Only the lingering echo of the pinch and a bright red outline already swelling above the knuckles, pulsing in time with my racing heart. When I looked up again, the boy was no longer smiling. His mouth hung open, just enough to reveal a long, almost translucent front of teeth. The other two children, the girl and the smaller boy, had frozen in perfect, silent mimicry, their small faces tilted upward in eerie unison. For one full, breathless second, all three stared. My body became a lockbox, unresponsive. Time itself seemed to flutter and collapse around me. I became hyper-aware of every hair standing on my arms, every microscopic twitch in my eyelid, every distant, frantic thump of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears like a drum in an empty room. Then, as one, the children simply blinked out of existence. No slow fade, no dramatic dissolve. They vanished completely, leaving only the empty park and the dripping silence of my living room. The street lamp flickered once, then settled back into its dull orange half-life. I sat for a long time on the edge of the old flowered armchair beside the window, rubbing the back of my hand, desperately trying to reshape what I had seen into something rational and safe. Insomnia does cruel things to the mind. It peels away the sensible layers and exposes the raw animal core beneath, the leftover dregs of evolution that still fear the dark. Hallucinations are simply part of the package, but the pain in my hand continued to pulse, vivid and real, so intense it made my teeth vibrate in sympathy. Eventually, I returned to bed, pulling the curtain shut tight, keeping the outside world and the inside world safely separated by the thin fabric and glass. I whispered the comforting lies to myself. Night terror, micro-dream, side effect of too many sleepless nights and the faint edge of fever. I almost believed them. Almost. At 7:03 a.m., when the first weak stripe of sunlight finally touched the bedroom wall, I woke to find my right hand curled tightly against my chest, fingers locked in a small, involuntary fist. When I forced them open, a perfect set of red, crescent-shaped welts stared back at me from the skin, already deepening into an angry purple. They throbbed like a fresh brand, a mark that belonged to someone else. That entire day, I remained trapped at my desk, the branded hand hidden beneath the edge of the table. Every few minutes, I would pry my thumb and forefinger apart, searching for any sign of infection or swelling that might explain the marks. I scrubbed the raised welts relentlessly, first with harsh soap until flakes of skin peeled away in thin curls, then peroxide until the bathroom air turned sharp and acidic, then alcohol until every pore screamed in protest and my eyes watered from the sting. Each fresh sting only drove the bruises deeper, turning it a more vicious shade of purple, clear evidence of someone else's deliberate cruelty reaching across the night. I repeated the lies like a mantra. You must have snagged it on the old bed frame in your sleep. You scratched yourself without realizing. But the half moons were spaced too perfectly, too evenly, impossible to have been caused by my own clumsy hands in the dark. When evening finally bled across the sky, in slow shades of gray and crimson, I drew every curtain tight, sealing the park away behind the layers of fabric. But the sound found its way inside anyway, slipping through the cracks I hadn't known existed. At precisely 2:47 a.m., the laughter returned, louder now, more insistent, hammering like hail against a tin roof and vibrating up through the old floorboards, straight into the marrow of my bones. This time it was no longer one or two voices. It had become a full chorus, wild and breathless, twisting through elaborate call and response patterns that grew more complex with every repetition, as though the children were inventing new rules to a game that no living person could ever hope to understand or join. I tried desperately not to watch. I sat with a book open on my lap, forcing my eyes over the same paragraph until the words dissolved into meaningless smears of ink on the paper. Curiosity, however, is a treacherous thing. It always wins in the end. I cracked the curtain open by the narrowest possible slit, just enough for a spy's cautious, guilty glance. Below, they ran their endless circuit around the rusted swing set that creaked softly in the wind, past the dented trash can, over the cracked concrete picnic tables, moving with mechanical, tireless perfection. No spoken words broke the pattern, only ragged gasps of laughter and the soft, wet thud of bare feet on the damp grass. Then she saw me. The girl wore a faded blue dress, its hem dark and stained, as if it had been dragged through endless mud and forgotten rain. Her hair was black as a void that seemed to swallow the streetlight whole, swinging in uncanny arcs with every step. While the boys followed some jittery, insect-like choreography, she moved like a marionette controlled by invisible strings, elbows held too high, knees barely bending at all, as if gravity had only a loose agreement with her body. At the end of one lap, she slipped away from the others and stopped directly beneath the lamp, her head tilted upwards with slow, deliberate precision, and I felt her gaze pierce straight through the narrow gap in the curtain, like a needle through cloth. Her skin stretched too taut over delicate bone. Her features were unnaturally smooth, almost doll-like in their perfection. Then she smiled, a grin so impossibly wide it threatened to split her small face in half, every tooth gleaming, sharp and white, canines longer and more pointed than any child's should ever be. She raised one slender hand and offered a slow, regal wave. I see you. I know you. My hand went instantly numb, fingers tingling as if circulation had been cut off. I dropped the curtain and stumbled backwards, crashing into a precious tower of unread books that scattered across the floor with dull thuds. But the laughter only swelled, vibrating through the walls like the beating of a second alien heart that had taken up residence inside of my home. I tried to drown it out with ordinary noises, clattering dishes in the sink until my hands ached, folding laundry with shaking hands, attempting half-hearted yoga poses on the living room rug until my muscles burned. Nothing worked. The sound burrowed deeper into my skull, nestling there, growing stronger and more intimate every time I tried to starve it of attention. At 3:22 a.m., a new sensation arrived without warning. A cold, crawling scratch climbing slowly up my forearm, as though a centipede with icy legs had claimed my flesh as its territory and was making its path. I watched in horrified fascination as a thin white line etched itself into the skin just below my elbow. The surrounding flesh puckering and rising, burning not with heat, but with deep, searing cold of dry ice pressed against living tissue. I slapped frantically at my arm, desperate to dislodge whatever invisible thing had marked me, but found only my own trembling fingers and that stark, grotesque new wound that refuses to be ignored. Outside, the children's laughter fractured into deranged giggles and ecstatic, high-pitched shrieks that seemed to feed directly on my rising fear, growing louder as if my reaction was the fuel they craved. By 4 a.m., I was back at the window again, curtain ripped fully aside, silently daring them to escalate their game even further. They obliged without hesitation. The boy with the skull smile pressed his pale face hard against the chain-link fence, cheeks flattening grotesquely like a corpse pressed to glass, knuckles bone white around the metal wires. The younger, shaggy-haired boy writhed on the wet grass as though fighting an invisible opponent, limbs jerking in uneven, unnatural spasms that made my stomach turn. And the girl remained just across the street, still waving that slow, queenly wave, still wearing that smile that could never belong to anything human. Their movements followed no logic I could recognize, more like a swarm of ants tracing invisible chemical trails, or crows solving complex puzzles for a single scrap of reward only they could see. I remained awake until the first gray hints of dawn crept across the sky, every light in the house blazing brightly against the coming day. The fresh scratch on my arm had bloomed into a deep, ugly bruise that throbbed with each heartbeat. When the sun finally rose, The park filled once more with joggers, dog walkers, and city workers in bright vests. But the children had vanished without trace. No footprints in the dew-covered grass. No scraps of fabric caught on the fence. No evidence they had ever existed at all. Yet, that same afternoon, when I caught an unwelcoming glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror, 3 new half-moon scars arched across my chest, like pale fingers reaching inward, marching steadily toward my heart with quiet, patient intent. On Saturday, I crossed to the park in daylight. The wind had swept the garbage away, and the benches sat clean as a bone. From a distance, the park looked ordinary, green with the tired weariness of late autumn, swings hanging still like the tongues of sleeping animals. I told myself that seeing the playground in sunlight would drain the nightly visions of their power. I hadn't planned on the bulletin board. It stood near the picnic tables, wrapped pine bleached by the years of sun. Beneath curling old notices were the missing posters, missing in bold black letters. Children's faces staring out from faded photographs. The dates stretched back 10, 12, even 20 years. As I looked closer, unease settled deep in my chest. The wide eyes, the dark hair, the quiet smudge of loss in every expression. They looked too familiar. Not identical, but close enough to feel like brothers and sisters. A silent family doomed to run the same circles around this playground until the board itself rotted away. I sat on a bench and let the cold seep through my jeans. Crows picked at the mulch while a dog walker struggled with her 3 mutts near the slide. In daylight, the park was nothing. Ordinary, almost peaceful. But the night the children appeared earlier than usual. Just past midnight, I heard singing instead of laughter. 5 or 6 of them darted between the swings and jungle gym, their voices ringing like coins dropped in an empty church. Their games felt more deliberate now. They stayed near the sidewalk directly across from my house. The tallest boy led them in a slow ring around the monkey bars, then stopped and stared straight at my window. He raised his hand. The others lined up beside him in perfect silence. A small girl in a white sundress stepped forward, cupped her hands, and yelled. The sound didn't fully cross the street, but I felt the vibration settle in my chest like a struck turning fork. I backed away and tried to stop watching. I lay in bed as the laughter rose again, cycling and layering, vibrating the glass, the pipes, and the air itself. An hour later, the noise cut off mid-scream. I heard the clatter of running feet on concrete. When I looked at the park, it was empty. But in the morning, I found a small, precise, muddy footprint on my front steps, leading right to the door. The deadbolt was untouched. I scrubbed the cement hard, yet the stone seemed unwilling to release the stains. On Sunday, I never even left the house. That night, I watched from deeper in the shadows. Lights off, only a silhouette behind the curtains. They played freeze tag. The girl in the sundress moved like Mercury. I recognized them now. The limp, the curly hair, matching the faces on the missing posters. The tallest boy suddenly stopped, lifted his chin and sniffed the air. The others flocked to him. One by one, they lined up and stared directly at my house. I closed the curtains with trembling hands. Later, the laughter faded, replaced by a low humming that slowly turned into a repetitive thump, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. My phone buzzed with an Amber Alert. Another child missing, 2 towns over. Sleep would not come. My leg began to tingle, then flared with a sharp pain just above the ankle, exactly like the kick of a small boot. When I pulled up my cuff, a red mark rose in the perfect shape of a child's heel. The next morning, I stayed behind closed curtains until mid-afternoon. When the urge became too strong, I walked to the park with my phone, determined to record proof. I heard clear laughter while filming, but the video showed only empty swings rocking in the wind and a distant hiss of static. That night I dreamed the children scaled the walls of my house with nimble hands, gathering on the roof and pressing small palms against the glass until it rattled. I woke to a heavy thud on the gutter. The line between dream and waking had grown dangerously thin. On Monday night, I set my phone to record continuously. The children appeared just before midnight and spread out evenly along the sidewalk, simply standing and staring. I felt them like pressure behind my eyes. At 12:43, the tallest boy ran to the curb and mouthed something silent. A sharp prick stung my arm. On the recording, the sidewalk remained empty. For days, I avoided the windows, pacing the old hallways. Sometimes the laughter echoed inside the walls. Sometimes I caught myself standing at the back door with my hand on the knob, unsure whether I wanted to run or let them in. It occurred to me that the park itself was reaching outward, invisible roots stretching beneath the street, slowly pulling the house into its territory. By the end of the week, I understood it was no longer a question of if, only when. By Wednesday, the laughter had learned my name. It was nothing at first, a simple game of call and response, the kind you hear on a yellow school bus at 3:30, windows down, and all the children full of post-homework sugar. But at midnight, the park was empty, and so every time the chorus began, it sounded like my own name spoken into an echo chamber, stretched and deformed until the syllables lost meaning and became something else entirely. Jamie. A pause, the thump of feet on wet mulch. Come out, come out. Another pause. The soft percussion of a body thumping into the jungle gym. Wherever you are. Sometimes it was a single voice. Sometimes 3 in harmony. Always just barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator and the click of the baseboard heat. Once, I heard it as a whisper through the bathroom vent, and I shivered so hard I bit my tongue enough to taste blood. Thursday evening, I broke my promise and returned to the window. The children were clustered at the curb, facing my house with a patience that seemed both animal and predatory. The girl in the white sundress stood front and center, toes pointed in. She was younger than I thought, maybe 7, but the way she held herself had the dignity of a child who had asked to wait in a very long line. Her hair was darker than the rest, her face pale even against the sodium glow of the street lamps. She cupped her hands around her mouth and called, "Jamie, come play with us." This time, I heard it crystal clear. There was no doubt. The sound entered the house through the seams of the old glass, found the hollow between my ribs, and rang there like a bell. She turned to look at the others, who mimicked her even as their lips made no sound. I stumbled away from the window and tried not to breathe. I had never been good with confrontation. My mother says I flinch at a loud noise, that I was always the child who watched the others from a safe distance before trying things for myself. I kept the curtains closed for the rest of the night, but I could not shake the sense of being watched, of the world beyond the window pressing its face into the glass. I slept on the couch in the living room, TV on low, hoping the endless churn of late-night infomercials might crowd out the memories of children's voices. It was a useless strategy. At 2:11, I woke to the feeling of something cold and electric crawling over my skin. The TV had slipped into blue screen. The room was darker than I remembered, the corners blurring and shifting as if submerged. My mouth tasted like pennies. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and lay perfectly still, listening. At first, only silence. Then, the unmistakable sound of knuckles rapping wood, a child's fist, and 3 quick beats. The knocking was not at the front door or the back. It came from the very center of the living room wall, as if there was a secret passage, or as if the house itself had grown an extra set of bones for them to use as a drum. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. A shadow flickered across the far wall, shaped like a child but wrong, too long in the limbs, too still in the head. It danced between the blue light of the TV and the dark of the hallway. And for a moment, I thought I saw the pale blur of a face, smiling with too many teeth. Then it was gone. The blanket offered no comfort. My hands shook under it, fingers pressed so tight they ached. I counted the seconds, the minutes, the slow slide of the clock's red digits until the sun bled weakly through the curtains. I rolled onto my side, hoping that the night's terrors would fade in the daylight. Instead, I found myself staring at a small bruise on my upper arm. 4 ovals clustered together like the bite of a child's hand. I sat up slowly, checked my other limbs. A fresh one, already purpling, bloomed on the meat of my shoulder. I touched it and winced. The skin was ice cold to the touch. I dressed, and I didn't look in the mirror. I made coffee, drank it in silence. I refused to check the window, refused to see if the children had left any messages on the sidewalk. I stayed in the kitchen until noon, waiting for my mind to reassemble itself. The thought of the shadow haunted me, its length and patience. I tried to explain it away. The shape of the lamp, the reflection of the TV, the inevitable blurring of a mind under stress. But I know what I'd seen. Friday morning, the world outside had glazed itself in the freezing rain. The park was empty, and the street looked wiped clean, as if the children's footprints had never been there. My own steps were the only ones marking the path from the house to the mailbox and back. I worked from home, answering emails, and letting the hours fall away like sand. But the dread did not dissipate. It only became sharper, more refined, as if the children were learning how best to hurt me. By evening, my hands trembled so badly I had to steady my mug with both palms. When the sun set, the park filled again. But this time, the games were not just across the street. I watched as the children mimed their rituals of domesticy. The girl in the white sundress walked an invisible dog up and down the block, pausing at my driveway to let the leash go slack. The tallest boy pretended to ring doorbells, pantomimed knocking and waiting, tapping his foot with exaggerated impatience. Another child, the curly-haired boy with the shy smile, pressed his palms to the air as if peering through a window. He moved up and down the block, searching each house in turn, but always lingering the longest in front of mine. I retreated to the safety of the bathroom, turned on the fan, and let the white noise drown out the world. It didn't help. I heard the knocks anyways. First at the door, then the window, then, impossibly, from inside the walls. I took a sleeping pill, then another, curled up on the couch and pulled the blanket over my head. The living room was bathed in the blue glow of the TV, but my thoughts were black, viscous, impossible to wash away. Somewhere in the night, I dreamed that the front door was opening, that the children were filing silently into the house, their bare feet soundless on the hardwood floor. I felt them settle around me, not menacing, just waiting, expectant. When I woke up, I could not feel my left arm. I pulled up my sleeve and found a ring of tiny bruises encircling my wrist. Each bruise was distinct, sharp, the size and spacing of a small hand. I followed them, zombie-like, from the couch to the front door. The deadbolt was still thrown, but the carpet was marked with faint, muddy prints. leading from the entryway straight into the living room. I didn't check the rest of the house. Instead, I sat on the couch and watched the sunrise creep up the wall, its weak light doing nothing to warm the air. I thought about the bulletin board in the park, the posters of lost children, some so old they'd become little more than rumors. It made sense now. They were not alive. They had never been, not for me. But their rituals were perfect, rehearsed and repeated, as if they'd watched this house for years and were only now learning that I could see them, that I was, in some miserable way, one of them. The laughter started earlier that night. I did not bother to close the curtains. That night, I abandoned my bedroom. The logic was simple. The children focused on the living room, the couch, the window that faced the park. It would be easier to defend myself in the open, to see their movements and anticipate their games. I told myself it was tactical, but really, it was an act of surrender. I dragged a comforter and 3 pillows to the couch, left every light burning in the house, kitchen, hallway, even the old chandelier above the stairs. The living room lamp flickered in and out, but I left it on anyway. It made the shadows jitter, which felt safer than the slow creep of unbroken darkness. The curtains were half drawn, a compromise between vigilance and fear. I lay on my side, face to the window, and waited. The park was silent at midnight, empty and flat, as if erased from the world by a careless God. But at 1:27 a.m., the children materialized. They stood in a perfect line on the sidewalk, shoulder to shoulder, hands at their sides. The tallest boy was in the middle. The girl in the sundress stood just to his right, bare feet planted on the wet cement. Their faces were pale discs, blank and expectant, staring at my house. None of them moved. The line was so precise, so unnatural that it looked choreographed. For a moment, I thought it might have been cardboard cutouts or elaborate hallucinations. But then one of the smaller boys twitched, lifted a hand, and scratched his nose. I blinked, and the whole line advanced a step. I don't know how long I stared. Time buckled, stretched, folded itself into useless shapes. The children remained, unmoving, for what felt like an hour. My breath condensed on the window, clouding the view. I wiped it away with my sleeve, fingers numb despite the heat running. 12:03 a.m., the knocking began. It was soft at first, almost playful. A child's fist, 3-beat rhythm of a nursery rhyme. The sound came from the front door, then the side window, then, bizarrely, from the wall behind my head. Each knock sent a shudder through the couch, as if the house itself was being gently probed for weakness. I lay perfectly still, heart racing. The knocking grew more intense, as if the children were growing bored with the rules of their own game. It climbed in pitch and tempo, the knocks overlapping until it sounded like the rain of small bones on the roof. I pressed my fist to my eyes and tried to think of anything else. The knocking never stopped. I took every scrap of willpower to get up from the couch and check the locks. The deadbolt was firm. The chain was in place. The glass in the window was cool and unbroken. But when I looked out, the children were gone. The sidewalk was empty, except for a single dandelion crushed under the street lamp. I exhaled, a thin animal sound. I turned from the window and was immediately struck by the sensation of being watched from inside the house. A prickling started in the base of my spine, ran up the crown of my skull. I moved to the kitchen, flipping on the light and checking each cabinet, each closet. Nothing. I was alone. I returned to the living room, but I didn't make it back to the couch before I felt a sudden, vicious pinch on my left side, just above the hip. I gasped, stumbled, clutched at the spot. My fingers found nothing but a spreading ache, deep and cold, as if someone had reached inside and twisted. Then, a second later, a new pain blossomed across my back, sharp and linear, a scratch drawn by fingernails made of ice. I whirled, expecting to see a child crouched behind me, but the room was empty. I ran to the bathroom, yanked up my shirt. A line of 4 bruises stained my ribs, already darkening. I turned to the mirror, saw the fresh scratch, long, thin, red, running from shoulder blade to spine. I touched it. My fingers came away with a bead of blood. I sat on the toilet lid and shook. After a while, I went to the kitchen and found rubbing alcohol, bandages, and a roll of old tape. I patched myself with the numb expertise of someone who had stopped believing in their own pain. Returning to the living room and sitting on the floor, legs pulled to my chest. The lights were still on, the curtains still half drawn, but the children were gone. The silence was a punishment. I did not know what they wanted from me. I didn't know if they wanted anything at all. But at 2:46, I heard the knocking again. This time, it was accompanied by a soft, dragging sound, as if something was being pulled along the length of my front porch. I stood and pressed my face to the glass, and the porch was empty. But the sensation of small, cold hands was everywhere. I slumped to the floor and buried my face in the comforter. The pain in my side and back pulsed with the rhythm of the knocking. I couldn't block out the sound. At some point, I realized I was crying, silent and animal. I squeezed my fist so tightly that a thin, fresh cut appeared in my palm, a line of blood staining the blanket. I whispered, "Go away." It was the only thing I could think of to say. A silence followed, deep and expectant. I looked up and saw, through the window, the tallest boy standing alone at the edge of the park. He was closer now, close enough that I could see the reflection of the porch light in his eyes. He smiled, slowly, the way an old man might, or a priest, or a wolf. Then he turned and vanished into the dark. I waited for morning in the light, afraid to sleep. The bruises did not fade. That night, the air thickened until every breath tasted of static and old snow. I kept every light burning and watched the clock crawl toward 3. At 3:05, the knocking erupted. Dozens of small fists beating at every door and window at once. For the first time, I understood how a mind could fracture under such quiet pressure. I grabbed the heavy flashlight and stepped onto the porch, sweeping its beam across the street with shaking hands. 3 children stood motionless in the center of the park, eyes wide and completely black. I called out, voice thin in the cold, "What do you want?" They didn't answer. I took several steps toward the curb. The smallest boy suddenly rushed forward, too fast, too smooth, and seized my wrist with an iron grip. 100 missing faces flickering behind his eyes. "Tag," he said inside my skull. In panic, I swung the flashlight. It cracked against his temple with a wet sound, black fluid oozing from the wound. But he only smiled, blood dripping down his chin. We just wanted to play. Forever. The other 2 advanced, their shapes blurring at the edges as if slipping between worlds. I wrenched free, slammed the flashlight down again, and bolted back into the house, slamming and bolting the door. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They found child-sized muddy footprints on the porch, but the snow in the park was untouched. They left convinced it was a prank. I lay on the couch with every light burning, the heavy flashlight resting on my chest like a talisman. My wrist throbbed with each heartbeat, a quiet countdown. I did not sleep that day, or the next. Sometimes I still hear the laughter, distant and muted as if through layers of snow. Sometimes there's only thick, living silence. The park is not empty. It's only waiting for me to close my eyes. Waiting for the moment when it'll be my face behind the glass, my name on the bulletin board, my voice echoing across the street, calling the next watcher to come play. The rules of the game are simple. It's only a matter of time. And somewhere across the street lamp is still buzzing its sickly orange glow. The swings are still swaying neatly in the night wind. The crushed dandelion is still laying on the windowsill. And something out there is still watching. If you've enjoyed tonight's story, you can find more from Ethereal Echoes, new psychological thrillers released every Wednesday and Friday. And if you'd like to hear them early and without ads, you can join us on Patreon. For now, let the laughter fade into the dark. Let the park disappear behind the glass. But if you wake up at 2:47 with fresh crescent welts on your skin, or you hear the high, looping laughter coming from inside the walls, you might not have left it out there after all. Some things don't stay in the park. They choose. And if they choose you, it's already closer than you think. Good night.